My name is Tom Hudson, and I'll never forget the day in 2008 when a devastating financial crash wiped out half our clients overnight, forcing me to rebuild everything from scratch. But little did I know, the real betrayal would come from within my own family years later. I had poured 38 years of my life into running that small accounting shop in Toledo, Ohio, a modest operation tucked away on a quiet street corner where the scent of fresh coffee always mingled with the rustle of tax forms and ledger books. It wasn't just a business to me, it was a lifeline for the community, especially for those 79 seniors who counted on our discounted rates to make ends meet without the stress of exorbitant fees. Many of them were widows or widowers, living on fixed incomes in modest homes along the Maumee River, and I made it a point to treat them like extended family, often chatting about their grandchildren or sharing a laugh over old stories while we sorted through their paperwork. Retirement was finally on the horizon, and I had planned a simple party at the local community hall to mark the occasion, inviting longtime clients, staff, and of course, my family. The room was filled with folding chairs, balloons in subdued colors, and a buffet table laden with sandwiches and punch, the kind of gathering that felt more like a neighborhood potluck than a formal event. My wife Lena was there, beaming with pride as she adjusted the collar of my shirt, her eyes sparkling with the shared memories of all those late nights we'd spent building the firm together. Our son Ethan, now in his 30s and sharp as a tack with his business degree, had been helping out more in recent years, and I assumed he was ready to take the reins in a way that honored what we'd created. But as the evening progressed and toasts began, Ethan stepped up to the microphone, his confident smile cutting through the warm chatter. He raised his glass, and in a voice that carried just a hint of triumph, he delivered the line that shattered the festive mood, "I already signed the sale, tomorrow everything changes for everyone." The words hung in the air like a sudden frost, and I watched in disbelief as Lena's hand trembled, her glass slipping precariously close to the edge of the table before she caught it. Whispers rippled through the crowd, eyes darting between us, and in that moment, the room's cozy familiarity turned into a stage for something far more dramatic than I had ever anticipated. That I did this all for my late wife May, whose sudden illness had bankrupted us back in the early days, leaving us scraping by on nothing but grit and goodwill from strangers. It was her memory and a solemn promise I made to myself, no lonely retiree gets left out, that inspired the firm to quietly run what we called the Neighborhood Rate Fund, a behind-the-scenes subsidy that kept our services affordable for those who needed it most, even if my son Ethan dismissed it as weights on the business's ankles, and pushed hard to scrap it within 60 days as part of his grand optimization scheme. Looking back, I suppose I should have seen the signs earlier, but a father's hope can blind him to the faults in his own blood. May had been the heart of our family, a vibrant woman with a laugh that could light up the dimmest tax season, always insisting that our work wasn't just about numbers but about people. She passed away too young, felled by a rare cancer that drained our savings faster than we could earn them, hospital bills piling up like unpaid invoices. We were on the brink of losing everything, the house, the firm, our dignity, when a kind stranger, an accountant from a rival shop, stepped in and filed our returns for free, no questions asked. That act of quiet compassion saved us, and in May's final days, as she lay in that sterile hospital room overlooking the gray Ohio skyline, she made me promise to pay it forward. "Tom," she whispered, her hand frail in mine, "don't let the lonely ones fall through the cracks. Build something that lasts, something kind." I honored that vow by splitting our modest profits to create the Neighborhood Rate Fund. It wasn't flashy, just a simple ledger entry that allowed us to offer deep discounts, sometimes even free services, to seniors on fixed incomes. Over the years, it grew to support 79 regulars, folks like old Mr. Wilkins, who shuffled in every April with his worn-out shoebox of receipts, or Widow Hargrove, who baked us cookies in thanks for helping her navigate widow's benefits. The fund operated discreetly, funded by a small percentage skimmed from our higher-paying corporate clients, ensuring that no one in our corner of Toledo felt abandoned by the system. It became the soul of Hudson Accounting, a testament to May's spirit that kept me going through long nights of crunching numbers alone after she was gone. But Ethan, bless him, saw things differently. He was always the ambitious one, even as a boy, building towering Lego empires while I balanced the books at the kitchen table. After college, he dove into the world of modern business with its buzzwords and spreadsheets, convinced that sentiment had no place in success. When he joined the firm 5 years ago, I thought it was a chance to pass on the legacy, to show him how integrity could coexist with profit. Instead, he started whispering about efficiencies and scalability, eyeing our operation like it was a relic from another era. The neighborhood rate fund, in his view, was a relic too, leakage that dragged us down. "Dad, it's like weights on the business's ankles," he'd say during our weekly lunches at the diner on Summit Street, his fork gesturing emphatically. "We're limping when we could be sprinting. In today's market, you optimize or you die." He pushed for changes almost immediately, digitizing everything, cutting back on personal touches, and yes, scrapping the fund within 60 days. "Think of it as pruning dead branches," he argued, showing me projections on his laptop that promised doubled revenues if we focused on high-value clients. I resisted, of course, reminding him of May's promise and the real people behind those numbers. But Ethan had that youthful certainty, the kind that dismisses experience as outdated. He began staying late, reorganizing files without asking, and I caught him more than once on calls with consultants, murmuring about streamlining the model. It wasn't until 2 months before the retirement party that the full extent of his plans came into focus, like a storm cloud gathering over Lake Erie. I had stopped by a co-working space on North River Road one afternoon, ostensibly to drop off some forgotten documents for Ethan, but really to check in on him after a tense staff meeting. The place was all glass walls and exposed brick, filled with young entrepreneurs tapping away at laptops, a far cry from our cozy office with its faded posters and community bulletin board. As I approached his rented desk, I overheard him on a call, his voice low but intense. "Look, Dad, sentimentality is a leakage line, we plug that, and the whole operation flows smoother." My heart sank, a cold weight settling in my chest, but I didn't confront him then. Instead, I lingered, pretending to browse a nearby vending machine, and that's when I spotted the draft plan left carelessly on a shared printer. It was from Grayline Holdings, a slick corporate outfit known for swallowing small firms and spitting them out as profit machines. The document was brutal in its clarity, and all free consults, quadruple the minimum fees to weed out low-margin clients, and cancel our cherished home visits to nursing facilities in Sandusky and Lima. Those visits were a cornerstone of what we did. I'd drive out personally, sometimes with a thermos of coffee, to help residents who couldn't make it to the office, sharing stories and easing their worries about estate taxes or Social Security. To Ethan and Grayline, they were just inefficiencies, lines to be struck through in pursuit of optimization. As I drove home that day, the draft crumpled in my passenger seat, I felt a mix of anger and sorrow. This wasn't just about the business, it was about betraying May's memory, about turning our back on the very people who had sustained us. Ethan didn't know the half of it, though. Back in 1996, when the firm was still young and May was alive, I had the foresight to structure things protectively. I split the operation into an operating LLC for day-to-day work and the Hudson Community Trust, which held the intangibles, the trademark, the client list, the archives of decades of service. And crucially, there was a founder consent clause. Any transfer of those assets required my wet signature, inked in person. Without it, any so-called process purchase was worthless. Grayline could buy the desks and the computers, but not the heart of what made Hudson Accounting special. I had set it up that way after a scare with a predatory lender years ago, ensuring that no one could strip away the essence without my say. Ethan, in his rush to modernize, had overlooked it entirely, or perhaps assumed I'd roll over in retirement bliss. The retirement party, meant to be a celebration, became the battleground. As Ethan's announcement echoed, I stood there, feeling the eyes of the room on me, old clients like Mrs. Ellis, who had been with us since the beginning, her frail hands clutching a napkin, staff members who had become like family, even Lena, Ethan's mother and my steadfast partner through the years since May's passing, her shock mirroring my own. But I wasn't about to let this slide. The promise to May burned in me, stronger than ever, and I knew it was time to reveal the safeguards I had put in place. Little did I know, the evening was about to unravel in ways that would change everything for Ethan, for Greyline, and for the future of the firm I had built with my own hands. 2 months earlier, the seeds of betrayal had already taken root, though I didn't fully grasp it until that fateful afternoon at the co-working space on North River Road, where I overheard Ethan pitching Greyline Holdings with words that cut deeper than any audit finding. "Dad's sentimentality is a leakage line," he said. And then I stumbled upon their draft plan abandoned on a printer, outlining the cold-hearted dismantling of everything I had built, ending free consults, quadrupling minimum fees, and canceling our vital home visits to nursing facilities in Sandusky and Lima. It was a crisp autumn day in Toledo, the kind where the leaves along the Maumee River turned shades of amber and rust, crunching underfoot as I made my way to the North River Road co-working space. I hadn't planned on dropping by. Ethan had mentioned he was working there temporarily, citing the need for a fresh environment, away from our office's outdated vibe. Our firm was housed in a converted brick building downtown, with creaky wooden floors and walls lined with framed thank you notes from clients over the years, a far cry from the sleek, modern hubs popping up for the younger crowd. But after a morning of sorting through a particularly thorny estate tax case for one of our seniors, I decided to swing by with a box of files he had requested. Call it fatherly instinct or just plain curiosity, but something nagged at me about Ethan's recent absences and his evasive answers during our family dinners. Lena had noticed it too, commenting over Sunday roast that he seemed distracted, like he's plotting world domination instead of helping with the quarterly reports. I chuckled it off then, but as I parked my old sedan in the lot surrounded by shiny electric cars, that nagging feeling grew into a quiet unease. The co-working space was a buzzing hive of activity, all open-plan desks and glass partitions, with the hum of espresso machines and the click-clack of keyboards filling the air. Young professionals in casual attire, jeans and hoodies emblazoned with tech startup logos, milled about, some on video calls, others huddled in brainstorming sessions. It felt alien to me, a man who had spent decades in the steady rhythm of paper ledgers and face-to-face meetings. I spotted Ethan at a corner pod, his back to me, phone pressed to his ear as he paced slightly, his free hand gesturing animatedly. I approached quietly, not wanting to interrupt, but his words drifted over clearly enough to stop me in my tracks. "Listen, Greyline, Dad's sentimentality is a leakage line," he said, his tone sharp and businesslike, devoid of the warmth he used to show when we discussed cases over coffee. "We've got these outdated programs, bleeding resources, subsidized rates for non-profitable clients, personal visits that eat up hours. Plug those, and you're looking at a 40% margin boost in the first quarter alone." My blood ran cold. Sentimentality? That was how he viewed the neighborhood rate fund, the very promise I had made to May. I ducked behind a nearby pillar, feigning interest in a community bulletin board advertising yoga classes and networking mixers, but my ears strained to catch more. He continued, painting a picture of our firm as a dinosaur ripe for evolution, promising Greyline a seamless acquisition if they moved fast. "Dad's retiring soon, he won't fight the changes. Trust me, I know him." The call ended with Ethan chuckling at some shared joke, and as he turned to his laptop, I slipped away toward the communal printer area, my heart pounding like it did during my first big audit back in the 80s. That's when I saw it, a stack of papers fresh off the machine, unattended and bearing the Greyline Holdings letterhead. Curiosity, or perhaps fate, compelled me to glance at the top sheet. It was a draft acquisition plan, detailed and merciless, like a surgeon's notes on excising tumors. The bullet points jumped out at me: terminate all free initial consultations effective immediately to filter high-value prospects only. Free consults had been our gateway, a way for wary seniors to dip their toes without fear. Many became lifelong clients because of that open door. Then, quadruple minimum service fees to $500 per engagement, pricing out low-margin demographics. That would devastate our 79 seniors, folks like Mrs. Ramirez, who relied on our $50 flat rate for simple returns, her pension barely covering rent in her modest apartment. But the real gut punch was the next line: discontinue all home visits to external facilities, including nursing homes in Sandusky and Lima, redirect resources to digital-only services. Those visits were sacred to me. Every other Friday, I'd load up my car with portable files and drive to places like the Sandusky Elder Care Center, where residents like Mr. Thompson, confined to his wheelchair after a stroke, would light up as I helped him organize his Medicaid paperwork. Or the Lima facility, a 2-hour trek, where I'd sit with groups of retirees, explaining changes in tax laws over lukewarm tea from the cafeteria. These weren't just services, they were connections, a bulwark against the isolation that plagues so many in their golden years. Canceling them meant abandoning people who couldn't travel, leaving them to navigate complex forms alone or fall prey to predatory online services. I snatched the draft, folding it into my jacket pocket with trembling hands, and retreated to a quiet lounge area, sinking into a beanbag chair that felt ridiculously out of place for a man my age. The document went on, projecting revenue spikes and optimization timelines, but it read like a death sentence for the soul of Hudson Accounting. How had Ethan gotten involved with Grayline? I knew of them, a faceless conglomerate based in Columbus, notorious for buying family-run firms, stripping them down, and rebranding them into impersonal chains. They had no regard for community ties. To them, clients were data points, profits were paramount. As I sat there, the chatter of the space fading into a dull roar, memories flooded back. I thought of May, how she would accompany me on those early home visits, her gentle presence reassuring nervous widows as we sorted through boxes of old documents. "It's about trust, Tom," she'd say, her eyes bright. "We're not just accountants, we're neighbors." Ethan had been a child then, tagging along sometimes, but somewhere along the way, he lost that lesson. Or perhaps the allure of quick success in a cutthroat world had overridden it. I confronted the possibility that my own son saw me as an obstacle, my values as leakage to be plugged. Driving home that evening, the draft plan burning a hole in my pocket, I pulled over at a scenic overlook by the river, watching the water flow steadily northward. Anger simmered, but so did a resolve. Unbeknownst to Ethan, I had safeguards in place, the Hudson Community Trust, with its founder consent clause. But discovering this plot 2 months before my retirement forced me to accelerate my plans. I spent the following weeks quietly reviewing documents with my old lawyer friend, ensuring everything was ironclad. Ethan continued as if nothing was amiss, attending staff meetings with his usual charisma, but I saw the cracks now, the way he avoided eye contact when discussing the fund, the late-night emails to Grayline that I glimpsed on his screen. The betrayal stung, sharper than the financial crash of 2008 that had tested us all, but it also clarified my path. At the retirement party, I would not go quietly into the night, I would fight for May's legacy, for the seniors who depended on us, and for the kind of business that valued people over profits. Little did Ethan know, his optimization was about to hit an unbreakable wall that he didn't know, my ambitious son Ethan, that back in 1996, amid the bustling optimism of a growing firm and with May still by my side, I had the foresight to split everything into an operating LLC for the daily grind and the Hudson Community Trust to safeguard the intangibles, the trademark, the meticulously curated client list, the archives of handwritten notes and decades of trust, complete with an ironclad founder consent clause that demanded my personal wet signature for any transfer. Without it, Grayline's so-called process purchase was nothing more than a hollow shell, granting them no real access to our brand or the loyal clients who formed the backbone of what we had built. That clause wasn't born out of paranoia, but from hard-learned lessons in a world where businesses could evaporate overnight, much like the small shops that dotted Toledo's streets in the 90s, swallowed by bigger fish without a trace. It was a humid summer evening in 1996 when the idea first took shape, May and I sitting on our back porch swing, the fireflies dancing in the twilight as we sipped iced tea after a long day at the office. The firm was just hitting its stride then, Hudson Accounting, a name we chose because it sounded solid, reliable, like the river that flowed through our city. We had about 24 clients, mostly local families and a few small businesses, and May was pregnant with Ethan, her hand resting protectively on her belly as we talked about the future. "Tom," she said, her voice soft but firm, "we're building something here, but what if life throws us another curve? Remember that story about the mill owner's family losing everything because of one bad deal? She was referring to a local tale, a cautionary one about a factory tycoon whose heirs sold off the family legacy to outsiders, only to watch it get gutted and rebranded into oblivion. I nodded, staring out at the darkening yard, and that's when we decided to consult our old friend, Attorney Harlan, a grizzled veteran with an office full of leather-bound books and a no-nonsense approach to estate planning. Harlan laid it out over coffee the next week, split the firm into layers. The operating LLC would handle the tangible assets, the desks, the computers, the lease on our little storefront with its neon open sign that flickered on rainy days. But the real value, the soul of the business, would reside in the Hudson Community Trust, our trademark, that simple logo May had sketched on a napkin one night, evoking stability with its clean lines, the client list, a Rolodex of names and stories, from the bakery owner who credited us with saving his shop during a tax audit to the retirees who sent Christmas cards every year, and the archives, boxes upon boxes of files that chronicled not just finances but lives, marriages, births, losses. All intertwined with balance sheets and deductions. The trust was designed as a non-profit arm, subtly funded to support community initiatives like the Neighborhood Rate Fund we later established. And at its core was the Founder Consent Clause, a provision Harlan drafted with the precision of a surgeon. Any attempt to transfer, sell, or otherwise alienate those intangibles required my explicit approval, documented with a wet signature, not a digital scribble, not a proxy, but my own hand on paper, witnessed and notarized. Without it, the buyer got nothing but echoes. The trust could revoke access instantly, leaving them with a shell company devoid of identity or relationships. I remember signing those documents in Harlan's office, the pen heavy in my hand as May watched, her eyes shining with pride. "This protects us, Tom," she said as we drove home, Ethan kicking gently in her womb. "It protects what will pass on." Little did we know then how prophetic that would be. Over the years, as the firm grew, expanding to serve those 79 seniors with our discounted rates, making those home visits to Sandusky and Lima that became a ritual, I kept the trust's details close to my chest. Ethan was too young to understand at first, and later, when he joined the business, I assumed he'd inherit the values along with the keys. But after overhearing his pitch to Grayline and finding that damning draft plan, I realized he saw the firm as a commodity, not a commitment. His process purchase was clever on paper. Grayline would acquire the LLC, rebrand it as Orion Ledger or some soulless name, and implement his optimizations, slashing the fund, hiking fees, ending the personal touches. But without the trust's assets, what did they really have? No trademark meant no recognizable name to market, no client list meant starting from scratch, cold calling strangers instead of nurturing relationships built over generations. No archives meant losing the historical data that made our advice so tailored, so trusted. It was like buying a bookstore without the books. In the weeks following my discovery at the co-working space, I didn't confront Ethan directly. Instead, I revisited the trust documents in secret, poring over them in the quiet of my home office while Lena slept upstairs. The clause was airtight. Harlan had assured me during a discreet phone call, "Tom, it's bulletproof. They try to bypass it, and the trust can trigger penalties, fines, mandatory disclosures to the state board, even reversion of assets to a community foundation." I felt a surge of gratitude for that 1996 decision, a shield forged in happier times now ready to defend against this internal threat. Ethan, in his eagerness, had focused on the surface, the operational side, assuming the intangibles would follow like obedient shadows. He didn't know about the split because I had never fully explained it. Perhaps I should have, but a part of me wanted him to earn that knowledge through loyalty, not entitlement. As the retirement party approached, I prepared my counterstrike, gathering evidence like the draft plan I'd pocketed and reaching out to a few trusted allies, Mrs. Ellis, our longtime cashier, who had her own suspicions after overhearing Ethan's calls, former intern Lauren, now a sharp tech whiz who could handle digital sleuthing if needed. The weight of it all pressed on me during those 2 months, nights spent walking along the riverfront, the cool breeze carrying whispers of doubt. Was I being too harsh on my son? Ethan wasn't a villain, he was a product of his generation, bombarded by podcasts preaching disruption and growth hacks, convinced that kindness was a luxury we couldn't afford. But May's promise echoed louder: no lonely retiree gets left out. The trust embodied that, a legal fortress ensuring our work endured beyond any sale. Without my signature, Greyline's deal was doomed, a fact that would come crashing down at the party, turning Ethan's triumph into a reckoning. As I buttoned my shirt that evening, Lena sensing my tension but not pressing, I knew the stage was set. The founder consent clause wasn't just words on paper, it was my final stand, a way to honor the past while securing the future for those who needed us most. During the party, as the initial shock of Ethan's announcement began to settle like dust in the community hall, representatives from Greyline Holdings took the stage with their polished slides unveiling the Orion Ledger rebrand. A flashy name that sounded more like a constellation than the down-to-earth accounting firm I had nurtured for decades. But just as their presentation hit its stride, a piercing fire alarm shattered the moment, plunging the room into confusion, and in that chaotic scramble, our loyal cashier Mrs. Ellis slipped me a sealed envelope containing her pre-deal consult receipt from Greyline, which brazenly denied her long-standing discount and served as damning proof of their cutthroat intentions even before the ink on the sale had dried. The retirement party had started innocently enough, the community hall on Adams Street decked out with string lights and long tables covered in checkered cloths, the air thick with the aroma of potluck dishes, casseroles, deviled eggs, and Lena's famous apple pie that she baked every year for such occasions. About 50 people had shown up, a mix of staff, clients, and neighbors, their faces familiar from years of shared coffees and consultations. I mingled in my best button-down shirt, the one May had picked out for me back in the day, shaking hands and accepting well wishes with a smile that masked the storm brewing inside. Ethan's words still echoed in my ears: I already signed the sale, tomorrow everything changes for everyone, and I could see the unease rippling through the crowd, whispers turning into murmurs as people glanced at me for reassurance. Lena hovered nearby, her arm linked in mine, squeezing it gently as if to steady us both. She had married me a few years after May's passing, bringing her own warmth to our family, but she knew how deeply the firm was tied to my first wife's memory. Ethan, meanwhile, strutted like a peacock, chatting up the Greyline reps who had arrived in their sleek suits and expensive cologne, a trio of executives named something generic like Mark, Lisa, and Greg, their smiles all teeth and no soul. As the evening progressed, Ethan called for attention, dimming the lights for what he billed as the big reveal. The Greyline team set up a projector, and up came the slides, glossy graphics, pie charts promising exponential growth, and that ridiculous new name, Orion Ledger, emblazoned in futuristic font. Imagine, the lead rep, Mark, enthused into the microphone, his voice booming over the speakers, a streamlined operation where efficiency meets innovation. No more outdated subsidies dragging us down, we're aiming for the stars. The audience shifted uncomfortably. I caught Mrs. Ellis, our cashier of 20 years, frowning from her seat near the back. She was a spry 70-something with silver hair pinned in a neat bun, always the first to arrive at the office with a thermos of herbal tea and stories about her grandchildren. Her discount through the neighborhood rate fund had kept her coming back, year after year, for help with her modest pension filings. As the slides flipped to projections of optimized client tiers, showing how low-margin accounts would be phased out, I felt my jaw tighten. This was it, the public unveiling of Ethan's betrayal, dressed up in corporate jargon. The room's warmth seemed to evaporate, replaced by a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air seeping through the windows. Then, without warning, the fire alarm blared, a shrill, insistent wail that cut through the presentation like a knife. Red lights flashed, and the sprinklers threatened to activate, though thankfully they didn't. Panic ensued in that understated Midwestern way. People rose from their chairs, looking around bewildered, some chuckling nervously as if it were a prank, others grabbing coats and heading for the exits. "Everyone stay calm," Ethan shouted over the din, his face flushed as he gestured to the Greyline reps to pause the slides. The projector flickered, frozen on a graph labeled Revenue Uplift Post-Optimization. In the confusion, bodies shuffled, chairs scraped against the linoleum floor, and voices overlapped in a cacophony of, "What's going on?" and, "Is it real?" I stood rooted near the stage, Lena clutching my arm, her eyes wide. It wasn't a real fire. Later we'd learn it was a false alarm triggered by a kitchen mishap with the coffee urn, but in that moment, it felt orchestrated, a divine interruption to the farce unfolding. Amid the chaos, Mrs. Ellis weaved through the crowd like a determined sparrow, her small frame dodging elbows until she reached me. "Tom," she whispered urgently, pressing a sealed envelope into my hand, her fingers cold and steady. "You need this. Now." Before I could respond, she melted back into the throng, heading toward the exit with the others. I slipped the envelope into my pocket, my mind racing. The alarm ceased after a few minutes, the hall manager announcing it was a false alert. And people trickled back in, laughing it off as, just Toledo luck. But the mood had shifted, the interruption had broken Greyline's momentum, and as they tried to restart the presentation, murmurs of discontent grew louder. Ethan shot me a glance, his earlier confidence cracking just a bit, but I kept my expression neutral, biding my time. Once the room resettled, I excused myself to the restroom, locking the door behind me for privacy. With shaking hands, I tore open the envelope. Inside was a receipt, dated just a week prior, from a preliminary consult Mrs. Ellis had apparently scheduled with Greyline at Ethan's suggestion. It listed a standard filing service, but where our discount would have slashed the fee to next to nothing, this one charged full price, $4.50, with a note scribbled in the margin, "Discount programs discontinued per acquisition terms." There was even an email printout attached, from Greyline's Lisa to Ethan, confirming, "We've reviewed the client's history, under new structure, no subsidies apply. Proceed with standard billing." It was proof, black and white, of their intentions before the deal even closed, denying aid to a loyal senior like Mrs. Ellis, who had trusted us for decades. My blood boiled. This wasn't just business, it was predatory, a sneak preview of how they'd treat all our vulnerable clients, quadrupling fees and cutting off home visits without a second thought. Mrs. Ellis must have gone undercover, perhaps tipped off by office gossip, to gather this evidence. Her loyalty touched me deeply. She wasn't just an employee, but a guardian of the firm's true spirit. Back in the hall, as Greyline wrapped up their pitch amid half-hearted applause, I felt the weight of the envelope like a talisman. The party continued with cake and toasts, but the undercurrent of tension was palpable. Ethan approached me later, clapping a hand on my shoulder with forced joviality. "Dad, exciting times, right? This is for the best, trust me." I nodded, saying little, but inside, plans crystallized. This receipt would be my ammunition when I took the stage later, exposing Greyline's prematurity and tying it to the founder consent clause. The false alarm had bought me time, and Mrs. Ellis's gift had armed me with truth. As the evening wore on, I glanced at Lena, who sensed something was afoot, her supportive smile bolstering my resolve. The rebrand to Orion Ledger? It would never happen, not on my watch, not while May's promise still guided me. This party, meant to mark my exit, was about to become the arena for reclaiming what was rightfully ours. I took the stage at that retirement party, the microphone heavy in my hand like the weight of all those years, and with the room's eyes fixed on me, I shared May's heartbreaking story, the way her sudden illness had bankrupted us, leaving us adrift until a compassionate stranger, an accountant from across town, filed our returns for free without a word of expectation. Then, voice steady. Despite the emotion welling up, I read aloud the founder consent clause from the trust documents, announcing that the Hudson Community Trust was immediately revoking all rights to our name and client base. Furthermore, I warned that any attempted workaround by Greyline or Ethan would activate a penalty clause, automatically forwarding our audit logs to the State Board for review and potential sanctions. The moment had arrived, the hall still buzzing from the false fire alarm and Greyline's interrupted presentation, the air thick with unspoken questions and the faint scent of cooling casseroles on the buffet table. I had waited through the cake cutting and the obligatory toasts, biding my time as Ethan basked in what he thought was his victory, his arms slung around one of the Greyline executives as they laughed over plastic cups of punch. Lena caught my eye from the crowd, her nod subtle but encouraging, as if she knew this was more than a speech, it was a reclamation. Mrs. Ellis's envelope burned in my pocket, its contents fueling my resolve, but I didn't need to reveal it yet, the trust's power would speak for itself. As the chatter died down, I stepped up to the makeshift stage, a simple platform with a podium borrowed from the local library. The spotlight from an old lamp casting long shadows across the folding chairs. The microphone squeaked as I tapped it, drawing all attention to me. "Friends," I began, my voice carrying the gravel of 38 years in the business, "family, loyal clients, thank you for being here tonight." This was supposed to be a celebration of retirement, but after what we've heard, I think it's time for some truth. I paused, letting the words settle, scanning the faces before me, old Mr. Wilkins, his cane propped against his chair, who had trusted us with his farm's books since the 80s, Widow Hargrove, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin, perhaps sensing the undercurrent, staff like our junior accountant Tim, who looked confused but attentive. Ethan stood off to the side, his smile fading into a wary expression, while the Greyline reps shifted uncomfortably, their polished slides still frozen on the projector. "Let me tell you about May," I continued, the name alone bringing a lump to my throat. "My late wife, the heart behind Hudson Accounting. Back in the early days, when we were just starting out, she fell ill suddenly, a rare cancer that hit like a freight train. Medical bills piled up faster than we could pay them, we were bankrupt, staring at foreclosure on our home and the end of this firm before it really began. I remember those nights, sitting at the kitchen table with stacks of paperwork, feeling utterly lost. But then, out of nowhere, a stranger stepped in, an accountant from a competing shop across town. He heard about our situation through the grapevine, showed up at our door with his briefcase, and filed our returns for free. No fanfare, no expectation of repayment. Just pure, unsolicited kindness. "Pay it forward," he said as he left. May never forgot that. In her final days, she made me promise, "Tom, build something that helps the lonely ones, the retirees who have no one else. No one gets left out." The room grew quiet, save for a few sniffles. I could see nods of recognition from those who remembered May, her infectious energy during tax seasons, how she'd bake cookies for clients waiting in the lobby. "That's why we created the Neighborhood Rate Fund," I went on, my voice gaining strength. "A quiet subsidy to keep rates low for our 79 seniors, folks like many of you here, who live on fixed incomes and need a hand without the humiliation of asking. It's not sentimentality, as some might call it, it's humanity. It's what saved us, and it's what we've given back for decades." I glanced at Ethan then, his face paling as he realized where this was headed. The Greyline reps whispered among themselves, one reaching for his phone as if to call for backup. But I pressed on, pulling the trust documents from my inner pocket, copies I had prepared earlier, the original safely locked away. "Now, about this sale," Ethan announced. "There's something you all need to know, something set in place back in 1996 to protect that promise." I cleared my throat and began reading the founder consent clause verbatim, my words deliberate and clear. "Any transfer, sale, or alienation of the intangibles held by the Hudson Community Trust, including but not limited to the trademark, client list, and archival records, requires the explicit written consent of the founder, Thomas Hudson, via wet signature, witnessed and notarized. Absent such consent, all rights revert to the trust, rendering any purported acquisition null and void." Gasps rippled through the crowd as the implications sank in. I lowered the paper, meeting eyes around the room. "I have not given that consent. In fact, effective immediately, the trust is revoking all rights to our name and client base from the operating LLC that Ethan claims to have sold. Greyline can have the desks and the coffee machine, but without the Hudson name, without our client's trust, and without the history that makes this firm what it is, they've bought nothing but air." The reaction was electric, murmurs turned to outright chatter, some clients clapping in support, others turning accusatory glances toward Ethan and the reps. Mark from Greyline stepped forward, his face red, stammering, "Mr. Hudson, this is highly irregular. We can discuss," but I cut him off, holding up the document. Furthermore, any attempted workaround, be it rebranding without permission or accessing client data illicitly, will trigger the penalty clause. That means automatic forwarding of our audit logs to the Ohio State Board of Accountancy for review. We're talking potential fines, license revocations, and a full investigation into unethical practices. I've already notified our attorney, the paperwork is in motion. Ethan's knees seemed to buckle, he leaned against a table, his earlier triumph evaporated, replaced by a look of sheer panic. "Dad," he whispered hoarsely, but I held my ground, the stage feeling like a bulwark against the tide of change he had unleashed. In that moment, as the room's energy shifted decisively in my favor, I felt May's presence, her promise fulfilled. Clients approached me afterward, shaking my hand, sharing their own stories of how the fund had helped them through tough times, a widow avoiding eviction, a veteran sorting disability claims. Lena hugged me tightly, whispering, "You did right by her." Even as Grayline huddled in a corner, their lawyer on speakerphone begging to repaper the terms, I knew the battle was won. The firm would endure, true to its roots, a testament to kindness in a world too quick to optimize it away. As Ethan went pale, his face draining of color like a ledger bleeding red ink, our former intern Lauren, now a tech-savvy ally who had quietly sided with the old guard, seized the moment and cast Grayline's internal chat logs onto the projector screen, revealing a damning message that read, "Widows equals 0 LTV, which stood for low lifetime value, reducing our cherished senior clients to disposable entries in a profit algorithm." The room erupted in outrage, turning against the outsiders as their lawyer desperately begged to repaper the terms, but I stood firm, announcing instead that I was moving the neighborhood rate fund under the protective umbrella of the Lucas Wood Credit Union and declaring that the firm would remain small, mobile, and focused on house calls first and foremost. That had been my plan all along, a quiet strategy to preserve May's legacy against any storm, including this one from within. The hall, moments ago a scene of subdued celebration, transformed into a courtroom of sorts, with me at the center holding the gavel of truth. Ethan's announcement and my revelations had already shifted the tide, but Lauren's intervention sealed it. She had been a bright-eyed college kid back in the early 2000s, interning during summers and learning the ropes while May was still alive, often helping with those first home visits to Sandusky. Now in her 40s, she ran her own IT consultancy but had stayed in touch, and when whispers of the sale reached her, she offered to dig discreetly. As I finished reading the founder consent clause, she stepped forward from the crowd, her laptop in hand, and with a few swift keystrokes, hijacked the projector that Grayline had used for their slides. Up popped the chat logs, screenshots from an internal Grayline Slack channel, timestamped just days before. The messages were brutal: prioritize high LTV segments, widows equals 0 LTV, phase them out Q1. Another, subsidies are dead weight, cut and redirect to premium tiers. The room gasped collectively, clients who fit that very description, widows like Hargrove, who had lost her husband to the factories years ago, stood up, their faces a mix of hurt and fury. "How dare you?" someone shouted from the back, and the murmurs swelled into a chorus of disapproval, eyes boring into the Grayline reps who shrank under the scrutiny. Ethan stumbled forward, his voice cracking. "Dad, this is a misunderstanding, I was trying to secure our future." But his words fell flat, drowned out by the crowd's turning sentiment. Their lawyer, a slick type in a pinstripe suit, rushed to the stage, phone in hand. "Mr. Hudson, let's not be hasty. We can repaper the terms, adjust the clauses, make this work for everyone." His pleas sounded desperate, laced with the panic of a deal unraveling. I shook my head, the microphone still in my grip. "No repapering. The trust stands. But here's what happens next: I'm transferring the neighborhood rate fund to the Lucas Wood Credit Union, a community institution that's agreed to administer it independently, ensuring it survives no matter what. The firm itself? It stays small, mobile, a van equipped for house calls, focusing on those nursing homes in Sandusky and Lima, on the seniors who need us at their doorsteps. No corporate overhauls, no quadrupling fees. That was always the plan, Ethan. I built safeguards not just against outsiders, but against losing our way. The applause started slow, then built, clients and staff rising to their feet. Lena embraced me on stage, her tears mixing with pride. Ethan slunk away, defeated, while Greyline's team packed up hastily, muttering about lawsuits that I knew wouldn't hold. In the end, the party became a rebirth, an affirmation that kindness endures. May would have smiled, her promise intact, our community unbreakable.